Cuphead tier list. This tier list is just going to be a regular tier list about the main game. I'm going to be basing it off two main things, and those are how much I like the boss and how easy the boss is. I do take public consideration in for one boss, but that's only like the one boss, so without further ado, let's get started. The first boss is the root pack. Being the first boss is obviously quite easy. In my opinion, it's a good introduction to the game. It teaches you the basic mechanics like jumping and shooting and parrying. I think it actually does a good job at teaching new players how to play the game. However, it's not usually one of the bosses that you like to come back to after you've beat the game. Instead, it's more like you go back to play it because you have to beat it on expert mode. And if you're an experienced player, you probably shouldn't be dying on this. So that's all I have to say for this boss. Overall, it's a pretty good boss, so that's why I'm going to put an A tier. Our next boss is Goopy Legrand. Boss to start off the game, but I don't think it's as good as the root pack. This boss is used to introduce ducking. If you've ever played this boss, you know it can sometimes get a bit repetitive. For example, phase 2 is just phase 1, but he's bigger. If you're taking damage with this boss, I really just want to know how. In phase 3, something finally changes. In this phase, Goopy turns into a gravestone and starts sliding across the screen. Every once in a while, he tries to smash down on you, and I've got nothing else to say about this boss. Overall, this boss does get a bit repetitive, but it's not too bad, so that's why I think it's fair that I'm going to put it in C tier. Now it's time for Ruby and Croaks. Whoever made these frogs, I hope you burn in hell. Every time I fight these frogs, I always die at least once. Just look at these frogs for a second. Just look how ugly they look. Disgusting. Anyway, I think we should actually talk about the boss. This boss is where it actually gets real. When you get to this boss, you don't get babies anymore. Hopefully from the last two really easy bosses that you've learned how to actually fight a hard boss like this. You're going to need all the skills that you've got to beat this boss. The first two phases are somewhat hard, but they're not as bad as phase 3 where the real trauma starts. You may be thinking it can't be that hard as there are only 3 attacks that you can get. These 3 attacks are the tigers, the bulls and the snake. Yes, these are snakes. Look at them, they're snakes, not frogs. If you're good enough so far, you actually might be able to get past this phase, but probably not if it's your first time playing. One good thing about this boss is that it allows you to go to the mausoleum to get the Super Art 1. I hate this boss, it's getting an F. And for our first plain boss, we have Hildeberg. I honestly think this is a good way to introduce plain bosses. I know that sounded positive, but there's a lot I need to say about this boss. When I was trying to S-rank her, it took me literal days. You know that this boss has the most amount of phases with 6. It is if you don't count King Dice's mini-bosses as phases, which I don't. So 3 of these phases are literally the same one, just with more attacks. This boss can actually be different between plays, as you can get either the Sagittarius or the Gemini twins. The Sagittarius just sucks so much. The Gemini twins are fine as long as you know how to go small. When you finish the 5th phase, she starts having a seizure and turns into a giant moon. When she opens her face, she shoots out 2 types of UFOs, red ones and brown ones. These are clearly brown, not yellow. Why do people say they're yellow? In summary, it's pretty easy, so I think it's time we go to the results. Overall, it's a good introduction to playing bosses and quite fun if you know how to play it, so that's why I'm going to put it in B tier. Now for our last boss of R1, Candy Carnation. I also kind of find it funny how he goes from this to this. It's just funny in my opinion. Something you might notice is that there's 3 platforms in the middle, which is the first time we see platforms in the game. Unless you count these things as platforms, which I do not. One of his attacks is turning to a gun and shooting at seeds, and one of them is parryable. Also, whatever you do, make sure you parry it. It's really going to be hard if you don't. If you do miss to parry it, it turns into a floating flower and you can only attack it when it opens its mouth. Another one of his attacks is extending his face either on the top or bottom of the screen. His final attack for this phase is covering his hands, and when he opens it, he can either shoot out a spinning seed or 3 homing acorns. The last attack he can use for this phase. When he transitions to the last phase, his hands shoot into the ground, causing roots to cover the floor. In a few seconds, roots shoot up on 2 of the platforms, forcing you to move. Sometimes Cadney shoots out flowers, which if you touch them, causes a blurry effect to cover the screen. Some of the flowers he shoots out are pink and can be parried. If you're Miss Chalice and are very good at timing, you can actually double jump over the roots he shoots out onto the platform. That's all for this boss, let's move on to the results. Out of all the bosses in R1, this one is definitely my favourite, so that's why I think it deserves an A+. Now for our first boss of R2, Baroness von Bonbon. First thing I have to say is that this boss is very heavily overrated in my opinion. She has 5 minions she can send out, but she only ever sends out 3. In this run I got the waffle, the candy corn and the gumball machine. The waffle flies around the screen in a circular pattern and every once in a while shoots out the 8 pieces. The way the candy corn moves sort of resembles an 8. In this phase and the next one, little jelly beans can run across the floor holding little swords. One of them can be parried. As already said, my last minion that I got was the gumball machine. The gumball machine moves across the screen side to side and occasionally shooting out a bunch of gumballs. Unfortunately, none of the gumballs are parryable. Also, now the Baroness has a shotgun. After we defeat this final minion, it's time to go into the last phase. In this final phase, her castle turns to life and chases you down. Baroness can also take your head off and throw it at you. Occasionally, a parryable peppermint rolls out of the castle. This repeats until you either die or win. Now it's time to rank her. It's an alright boss, so I think it's fair that I put it in B tier. It's time for this guy. In this phase, there's 2 attacks you can get, either the swords or the gems.
Actually, there's 3. You forgot about the cats.
Shut up! I didn't ask you, did I? Anyway, as I was saying, there are 2 attacks. The swords, they can either go on the top, bottom, or left side of the screen. The gems go all over the screen. Both of these attacks have some parryable objects. In the second phase, there are multiple pillars. One of them has his head where you need to shoot out to go through. On some of the pillars, he has 2 heads. And in between the pillars, you have spinning blades that go up and down this. There is also around 6 to 7 pillars. After you do all that, you're into the third phase. In this phase, the Jimmy is now in the sarcophagus. Then the Jimmy opens the sarcophagus and a weird stretched out version of his head pops out. In a few seconds, his eyes pop out and turn into little floating planets. After you defeat him, he closes his sarcophagus and bounces away. Then he pops back up and uses his telekinetic powers to make a puppet of us. I just wanted to add, because I'm Miss Chalice, I think there should be a Miss Chalice puppet. Anyway, the puppet walks around for a bit and then he shoots out of his finger and one of the bullets is parryable. Also, if you haven't noticed, the Jimmy's hat's here and occasionally it shoots out 4 bullets. Neither of these attacks are too hard, but when you put them together, they can be a bit tricky to avoid. Anyway, after you defeat him, the Jimmy's hat and the puppet both leave and now the Jimmy's massive. The Jimmy spawns 3 pyramids that occasionally shoot out beams in all directions. Jimmy can also shoot a beam out of his hat that is directed towards the player. After you do that for a bit, the Jimmy is defeated and now we can go on to the results. Overall, it's a pretty good boss. It's not too bad, but it's also not the best, so that's why I'm going to put it in B tier. Our next boss is Beppy. One thing you might notice when you start this fight is that Beppy looks kind of familiar. Anyway, in this first phase, Beppy's in a bumper car and he dashes from side to side across the screen. He also ducks at the top of the screen, and one of them is parryable and one of them holds a light bulb which it drops on you. There's not much else about this phase, that's literally it. He just dashes from side to side and the ducks are just kind of annoying in a way. When phase 1 finishes, he falls off his bumper car and comes off as a giant balloon. When he inflates himself, a bunch of tubes start spawning and those tubes shoot out inflatable dog balloons. Now there's also a roller coaster you have to try and avoid as well. The roller coaster is quite long and there's a few passengers every few rows. Also, the nose of the roller coaster is parryable. The annoying part about this phase are the dog balloons, and yes, some of them are parryable, but by the time you get to them, they're probably popped anyway. And also, now the roller coaster is here for the rest of the boss fight. When you beat this phase, his head disconnects from his body and floats away. In the third phase, he can either ride a green or yellow horse. Yellow horse shoots out a bunch of horseshoes that go up to the top of the screen, and you have to dodge them when they fall down by going in between the gaps. The green horse shoots out horseshoes that go up and down the screen in a wave-like pattern. Sometimes one of these horseshoes can be parried. This phase can be easily cheesed by sitting underneath him with spread shot. When you finish this phase, he'll start crying and exiting the screen. Then you'll see him come down in the middle of the screen and fall off his horse. Then a few seconds later, he comes back as a giant carousel. When he opens up, a bunch of platforms spawn which you have to jump on to avoid the roller coaster. When the roller coaster goes by, he sends out 4 penguins from his mouth which go across the bottom of the screen. These penguins also shoot out baseballs towards the player. There's 2 things the player can do to get rid of them. They can either wait at the top for the roller coaster to kill him, or they can go down and kill him themselves. That's all I have to say about this boss. Let's move on to the results. It's overall a good boss, but if it's your first playthrough it might be a bit hard, so that's why I'm going to put it in A tier. Now for the last plain boss of L2, Woolly Wobbles. This boss starts with Woolly Wobbles coming out of a clock. There are 2 main attacks you can use in this phase. The first attack is turning his head into a hand and then shooting out 3 bullets. The second attack is shooting at an egg which when it hits the side of the screen splits up into 3 pieces. To avoid this attack, you can go to the side of the screen because the eggshells don't go there. About halfway through this phase, 4 birds come across the screen and one of them can be parried. So that's all he does in this phase, go up and down, shoots his eggs and shoots his bullets. When you finish this phase, he gets a bit angry and shoots feathers all over the screen. To avoid the feathers, you have to make fast but subtle movements. The birds from phase 1 are still here. If this is your first time playing, this might seem really hard, but if you know what to do, it's actually quite easy. This phase is the first bullet hell, as some people call it. When you beat this phase, he falls out of his clock and his sun comes out. Now this child is the worst part of this boss. He has 5 eggs that spin around him. These eggs also move from close to him to far away from him. Woolly Wobbles also has a gun which shoots out a parryable bullet. Like the horseshoes and Beppy's fight, he moves up and down in a wave-like pattern across the screen. And half the time you can't attack him because the eggs are too close to him, so you have to use the bombs. The best part about his phase is when you beat him, he starts crying. At the start of phase 4, Woolly Wobbles comes back in a stretcher being held by 2 Dr. Birds. Woolly Wobbles himself only has 2 actual attacks that he can use. One of these attacks is shooting his heart out of his mouth, and when it comes back down it shoots out 3 bullets. His second attack is turning his head into a rubbish bin and shooting out rubbish. One of the rubbish objects can be parried. You may have noticed that the 2 Dr. Birds shoot out pills that split in half. That's all I have to say about this boss. Let's go on to the results. Now I would put this boss in A tier, but because of the fact that Woolly Wobbles exists, it has to be a C tier. Now for the actual last boss of L2, Grim Matchstick. Hate me all you want, but this boss isn't actually as bad as people say it is. People say this boss is really hard, but if you use Lobber, it's like one of the easiest bosses. Also, none of the attacks are that hard. Anyway, in this phase he has 3 attacks. One of the attacks is shooting out fireballs from his mouth, and sometimes they can come in 2. The second attack is shooting out laser beams from his eye, with one of them being parryable. The final attack is him shooting his tail from wherever the player is standing at the current moment. When you beat this phase, you can see him slowly back off, and then you see him flying across the background. He comes back on the other side and shoots his tongue out where fireballs walk across. There are 2 types of fireballs, ones that walk across the bottom of the screen and ones that jump out at you. Other than that, the fireballs are kind of useless, they don't do anything else. Grim also shoots fire out of his nose to prevent players from camping above him. It's not too hard, but the fireballs can get a bit annoying. Once you beat this phase, he reveals that he has 3 heads. All 3 of the heads can shoot out a fireball, and when it gets shot, it shoots out in 4 different directions. Also, after a while, the middle Grim Matchstick head turns into a flamethrower and shoots a flame across the middle of the screen, causing you have to go either on top or the bottom. All this repeats until you beat him. This may not be the hardest, but the fireballs can get really annoying if you keep getting hit by them. Well, that's this boss done. For some reason when I beat him, everything turned black. If you know what happened, let me know in the comments. Again, this boss was going to be an A, but due to other people's opinions, I'm going to have to put it in B. Now for our first boss of Aisle 3, Rumour Honeybottoms. Being the first boss of Aisle 3, it really doesn't make a good impression. In this first phase, there's a big cop that flies across the side of the screen while throwing bombs at the player. When the bomb explodes, it splits out into 6 pieces and 3 of the pieces are parryable. There's also a bee worker that flies across the side of the screen. Just imagine you're trying to go home to see your family and then you get murdered by some cop. Do you feel good about yourself? Do you? You heartless little creature. Once you end this phase, he gets an injury to his shoulder and flies off the screen. Then Rumour makes her first appearance coming down from the top of the screen. She can either come down from the top, middle, left or right side of the screen. If she comes down from the middle, her neck turns into a chain and falls down to the bottom of the screen. Then she shoots out bee bombs that go up the screen from left to right. When she's done with that, her neck retracts back to her body and comes off screen. She'll either come down from the top left or right side of the screen. You can do 2 attacks with her wand, but I only got 1 in this playthrough. These attacks are either the ball or the triangle.
Actually, it's a tetrahedron, not a triangle.
Why are you back? Do you want to get shot again?
Oh no, not again.
Anyway, the ball itself is parryable and the triangle shoots out mini parryable triangles. When you beat this phase, she comes down in the middle while reading a book, and then she does a spell which turns her into a giant plane. She flies off screen and then comes back at the bottom of the screen. One of the attacks that she can do is flying off to one of the sides of the screen and then bringing her arm up as a Sora and going to the opposite side of the screen. And also she shoots out homing fists, which are just really annoying to dodge in my opinion. Some people use Lobber for this boss, but in my opinion it's not very good to use. And if all that wasn't hard enough to dodge, you also have to try not fall down onto her. And after you do all that, she's finally done. It's time for the results. In my opinion, this boss is one of my least favourites in Aisle 3, so that's why I'm going to put it in D tier. Now for the most underrated boss ever, Dr. Carl's Robot. People usually say this boss is the hardest boss in the game, but I think otherwise. Now yes, for a first time player, this is quite a hard boss, but if you played more than like 5 times, it's actually quite easy. And if you break everything in the right order, it actually becomes a bit easier. So this is the order that I break everything in. The laser, then his stomach, then his heart. I do it in this order because that's what the secondary attacks are easiest to hardest. And also the heart laser counts for a parry. The primary attacks are the laser, small flying metal objects, and the heart laser. The secondary attacks are the nuts and bolts, homing bombs, and the arm. I know I did break the heart first here, but I didn't mean to. Once you destroy all of his attacks, the heart comes out of his heart plate, and that's what you need to attack now. When you attack the heart enough, it half goes black, and then you tell that you're halfway through. And unlike the 2 secondary attacks, the arm has 2 attacks, the magnets and the floating bullets. When his heart disappears, that's when you beat the phase and then his head shoots off. A way to sort of skip this phase is to bomb as soon as his head shoots off, but I didn't do a very good job at this in this attempt. After you do that, you're into the 3rd and final phase. In this phase, Dr. Carl's robot can pull out either a red or blue gem. The red gem shoots 8 electrical things in all directions. There are also electrical walls that it dodge as they go up and down the screen. The blue gem is like the red gem, but instead it has 6 instead of 8. Both of these attacks have a parryable object that will help you get the bombs to kill him faster. After a lot of gems, electrical walls and bombs later, he's finally dead. Now let's move on to the results. This was originally going to be an F tier, but since I started playing it again I realised how easy it was, so it's going to be in B tier. Our next boss is Sally's stage play. No. I really don't like this boss, it's my least favourite of all 3. Well, at least this boss has more than 2 attacks per phase. There are 2 main attacks and 2 extra attacks. The 2 main attacks are jumping into the air and floating down to the player, and jumping in the air and shooting a fan at the player. The 2 extra attacks are getting eaten by her umbrella and then spawning above the player or blowing the player a kiss, which can be parried. After you beat this phase, she teleports off screen and gets in her car and takes her husband away. In the second phase, we stand outside a home that has babies that throw bottles at us. Sally now has a new attack where she opens her umbrella and 4 mice come out and they go up to the top of the screen and fall down above the player. In this phase, she still has her 2 main attacks, as I called them last phase. The worst part about this phase is the mice, I just hate them so much. You beat this phase, she dies and flies off screen. In the 3rd phase, she comes down, but she's now a cardboard cutout. In this phase, there are 3 things she can spawn. Those are the meteor, the big wave and lightning. When you break the meteor open, a parable star comes out which is used to jump over the big wave. And lightning spawns 3 to 4 bolts that home towards the player's current location. After beating this phase, she dies and goes off screen again. Then she comes back down as herself, hovering just under the top of the screen. Her umbrella is now also on the bottom of the screen following a player. And the audience also throws roses that can be parryable. And now let's move on to the results. I would put this in F tier, but the frog's already in F, so I'm going to have to put it in D tier. Now for everyone's favourite German rat in a can, Werner Werman. You probably noticed about this boss, he's in a little tin can on wheels which is supposed to represent a tank. In this first phase he has 3 main attacks that he can do. One of these attacks is shooting at tomato bombs from a cannon, which when they hit the floor they split out into 2 firebolts. The second attack is his dash attack, where he shoots out 2 parryable springboards and then dashes across the screen. The third attack is his rubbish catapult, where he reaches his catapult back into his can and sucks out rubbish and throws it at the player. 2 of these are gum, which can be parried. You will usually get all 3 of these at least once per playthrough. When you beat this phase, he goes to the middle screen and pulls out a firework, which goes wrong and blows up his can. In this phase, he can go either below or above the platforms and shoot out fire from what's left of his can. There are also now 6 bottle caps on each side of the screen, which occasionally go out across the screen. When 1 bottle cap is already out, 1 bottle cap will retract, showing that it's about to go out next. Once you beat his phase, what's left of his can malfunctions again, and then a cat that you've been seeing in the background eats him and it becomes a new boss. Also, in case you were curious, this cat's name is Katzenwagen. There are 2 attacks that Katzenwagen can use. The first attack Katzenwagen can use is extending his arm off screen, and then it comes back covering the bottom of the screen, and from the ceiling little wood chips fall. In the second attack, Katzenwagen opens his mouth, revealing a cell, and 2 ghost rats come out, and they also throw out parryable objects that split into 2 when they hit the floor. Now that the boss is done, it's time to rank it. Overall, it's one of the best bosses we've covered so far. It's actually my favourite in all 3, so that's why I'm going to put it in A+. And now for our last plain boss, Calamaria. I find it funny that when other people make Cuphead tier lists, they rank it high because, you know, they're simps. I know I complain in the other bosses about they don't have enough attacks, but this isn't what I meant. In this first phase, she has 6 attacks. And these attacks are the pufferfish, the seahorse, the turtle, the blue and red fish, and the unknown sailors. I don't know if I have enough time to explain all of them, but I'm going to try anyway. When she calls the pufferfish, they go from top to bottom in different patterns, with some of the pufferfish being parryable. The seahorse follows the player on the bottom of the screen while shooting up a water beam which pushes the player up. The turtle stays across the bottom of the screen and shoots out 3 bombs that, when they explode, split out into 8 pieces. The yellow fish shoots out an electric fish that follows the player for a few seconds. The red fish shoots out 6 fireballs, with one of them being parryable. Finally, the unknown sailors shoot out Calamari's mouth and then they go to the player's current location. Oof. Well, I guess I did have enough time. When you beat the first phase, she gets bit by 2 electric eels and then turns into something that's supposed to represent Medusa. Now in this phase, she only has 2 attacks, unlike the 6 she had in her last phase. The first of these attacks is shooting a laser beam out of her eyes that turn the player into stone. The second attack is spawning a bunch of eels that shoot out 5 pellets, one of them being parryable usually. You can also avoid the lasers by going on the top left side of the screen. When you beat this phase, her body turns to stone and her head detaches, going into a cave. She still has her laser beam attack, but in this phase, instead of it covering the whole screen, it flies across the screen in a wide wave-like pattern. Also, the eels shoot out skulls and bubbles, which only pop if they get touched by the player. There are also some spiky cylinders which can get in your way if you're already frozen. That's another boss down, let's move on to the results. I don't mind this boss, but it's my least favourite out of 2 play bosses in this house, so I'm going to put it in C tier. It's time for Captain Brineybeard. I haven't done a funny moment in a while, so I was going to add one to the start of this boss, but I couldn't find one, so sorry, I'll probably add one to the next one, so... At the start of this boss, there's not much attacks, but trust me, it makes up for it later. Captain Brineybeard only has 1 attack himself, but there's also a barrel that falls onto the player when it has an angry face. There are no actual phase transitions, but you know you're in the second phase when he whistles and either a shark, or a couple of bulldog, or a squid appears on screen. When he whistles, both the shark and the bulldog have different sounds to notify that they're going to appear on screen. And if he whistles and no sound is made, then you know the squid's going to appear on screen. Now that you know what the attacks are, I'm going to explain them. When the shark's going to appear, it swims in the background for a bit and then it goes halfway across a playable floor before flopping back. When the bulldogs are going to appear, they put a periscope in the water which quickly disappears and then around 4 of them pop out. When the squid appears, it sprays out ink from an ink bottle which makes the player temporarily lose vision. Like in the last phase, there's no actual transition, but you know you're in the third phase when the ship starts shooting out cannonballs from its mouth. There's no other attacks other than that, so it's pretty much the same, but just with a bit more jumping. Out of all 4 of the phases, this one's definitely the hardest. When you beat this phase, the ship gets bored and takes stuff into his own hands, kicking Brineybeard off the ship. You can actually see him falling in the background. The ship opens its mouth and now the uvula is the thing you have to attack. Also, the barrel's still here. There are only 2 attacks in this phase. In the first attack, the uvula spits out 3 balls of fire that go in a loop-like pattern. In the second attack, the ship shoots out a laser which you have to duck under. So that's this boss down, there's only 3 more to go. Overall it's a good boss, but because of the lack of phase transitions it gets a bit boring, so I'm going to put it in B tier. Now for our last boss of aisle 3, Phantom Express. First thing in this boss is bloody Casper the ghost coming out the back of the train. In this phase all he does is one thing, and that's shoot eyeballs out of his hands. Now usually this would be hard, but if you know how to look and have conversion, it's not hard. And also you have the pumpkins dropping bars of soap on you.
Actually, they're bricks, not bars of soap, get it right.
I'm really not in the mood, so you know what's just gonna happen now, don't you?
Just shoot me already.
hopefully that's him done with. Anyway, after he dies, the cup moves on a bit and it comes to a point where it stops and a skull and 3 arms pop out, and then the arms try to crush the player, but if you stand in the corner of the cart, you should be fine. I say should be because the pumpkin might drop a bar of soap on your head. The skull also moves its arms around a bit in positions that don't look quite, how do I say this, normal. Also, in like the first phase, if you know how to lock in this phase, you literally don't have to move at all. After you beat this phase, he retreats back into the train and then you move a few more carts down. Carts, carriages, it doesn't really matter what you call them, they're the same thing. When you reach the part where the next phase is, 2 lollipop things pop out, and also there's
tampon ghost.
Oh yeah, that's the one. Anyway, both the lollipop ghosts takes turns blasting electricity off the screen, and also you can just cheese this phase by sitting in the corner again. So because of that, the only thing you actually have to worry about is hitting the ghost and the skulls landing on the platforms, moving it into the laser beam. After beating this phase, you move along one more time and seeing the train getting angry at you escaping. And then it just grows legs and starts chasing after you. This phase is one of the only phases where I actually use chaser, so, you know. To deal damage to this boss, you need to parry its tail, opening a panel that exposes its heart. The train also shoots out bones from its nose, which go down the side of the screen and go to the player when they're at the same height. After parrying the tail a few more times, you beat the boss. Right, that's the last boss of R3 done, now let's rank it. Because of how easy this boss is and how easily you can cheese it, I think it's fair that I put it in C tier instead of anything else. Let's move on to the best boss ever, King Dice. If you've seen the thumbnail, then you know where this is going, but yeah, I still gotta rank it anyway, so let's go. For this boss, usually I pick 1, 4 and 7. Now number 1, which is the boss that I'm gonna fight now, is the Tipsy Troop. For this mini boss, there are 3 enemies that you can attack in any order. The order I attack them in is the shot glass in front, the wine glass in the middle, and the beer bottle at the back. I do it in this order because in my opinion, the attacks are hardest to easiest when I do it like that. Speaking of the attacks, I should explain them now. The shot glass spills its liquids across the floor, forcing you to have to jump. The wine glass shoots a few olives in the air which shoot out their eyes out. And the beer bottle shoots out a stream of beer into the air which comes down on the player's exact location. Anyway, this boss is easy, now let's move on to the next one. An easy way to pick what number you want from the dice is to duck underneath it, and when the number you comes up once, jump and quickly parry it. That's what I do at least, and it works all the time. Unless you want a 1, then you just parry as soon as his hands clap together. The second boss that I face is Pip and Dot. Pip and Dot are a couple that are totally not toxic or unhealthy. The floor for this boss is moving backwards to a wall of spikes, and there are also some spikes scattered across the floor, but the floor moves back slowly, so you don't really have to worry that much. Pip and Dot can like open their mouth sort of thing, whatever that is, and shoot out a 20-sided dice, which could either be orange, blue or pink, and the pink one being parryable obviously. They can also lift up their hat, causing a bird to come out, going across the screen in a sea-like pattern. Wrap this boss down, let's time to move on to the final mini-boss that I choose. Like last time, I duck under the dice and parrying to get a 3. The next boss I pick is number 7, which is Piruletta. Piruletta is a giant Russian roulette wheel. He only has 2 attacks. One of his attacks is shooting balls which come down on a triangular pattern. This can be avoided by either smoke dashing through it or waiting for the gap to come. The second attack is her dashing from side to side across the screen. This can be avoided by either smoke dashing through her legs or turning one of the 4 chips into a platform by parrying on it and jumping over her. For both of these attacks, it's better to smoke dash through them than use the actual intended method, because if you don't, it's going to be really hard, especially if you're not the best at parrying or timing. That's the last actual mini boss down. Now it's time to fight King Dice himself. You only have to parry the dice 2 more times to actually fight King Dice. One of them's to get to the safe and one of them's to get to the end. This final boss can be tricky if you don't know how to parry, but you should be considering you just fought Phantom Express and all you do in that boss is parry. In the actual fight, King Dice uses his hand to send out a bunch of cards, with a few of them being parryable, and you're going to need to parry them to not take damage. For some reason I used my super on King Dice and it kind of broke him, so just watch me beat him, I guess. It's not that hard. Enjoy, I guess. Anyway, that's King Dice down. Now it's just the devil left. You've seen the thumbnail, you know where this is going. It's going in S tier, it's the best boss ever. And also I got an A+. And now for the final boss, the devil. And then the fight begins. He has quite a lot of attacks in this phase, but considering it's the last boss, I think they're needed. There are 4 actual attacks, and there's 3 mini attacks that come with one of the attacks. And I'm going to explain all these attacks now. The first attack is the goat attack, where he turns into a goat and extends his hands just off screen, and then shortly after, his hands come back on the screen on the floor, causing the players to have to jump. The second attack is the fork pick attack, which has 3 attacks. Those attacks are the bubbles, the homing fireballs, and the fireballs hexagon thing. The third attack is the spider attack, where he turns his head into a spider and it drops onto the players around current location. This can repeat a few times. The final attack is the dragon attack, where he turns his head into a dragon, goes up off screen and comes either on the left or the side of the screen, causing the players to go all the way on one other side of the screen to avoid it. When you beat this phase, the devil jumps out of its skin and jumps down into a hole and the player follows, but then the devil can be seen as giant. For the rest of the boss, instead of having a floor to attack him on, you have to stand on 5 platforms, which after every phase 2 get removed. There are also poker chips that fall onto the platforms. There are 2 attacks in this phase, the axe attack and the bomb attack. After you beat this phase, he gets mad that he can't beat you and his face turns into a sort of angry face. Like I said, 2 platforms got removed, those 2 are being the outer 2 platforms. In this phase, he brings out 2 minions which stand where the platforms used to be. Well, I say stand, they kind of fly. They also shoot out skulls. What I like to do is take out one of the minions so there's less to deal with. There are also bats which occasionally turn into like little frisbee things and fly down towards the player. The devil himself doesn't even have any attacks in this phase, so after you beat this phase, the devil starts crying, and the only things that can damage you are his tears and the poker chips falling onto the one platform that's left. After you do all that, you've beat him, you've beat the game. Congratulations. I really do like this boss, but I would put it in S tier, but obviously King Dice is there, so I'm going to put it in A+ instead. Well, congrats, you made it to the end of the video. The DLC tiers will be out soon, but beforehand, there's just 2 things I want to say. First off, my 300% in Cuphead Part 2 video won't be coming out, but bit better news, I have a Twitch now, so go follow. I'll put the username on screen. So that's all I have to say. Have a good one. Bye.